This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a repeat guest.
Repeat offender.
A repeat, absolutely. Well, what have you done to deserve such terrible treatment? Ian Nathan.
Greetings. It's really nice to be back, actually, because every time we get together, it's just like getting together in a pub for a chat about films, isn't it? It's just like, oh, what have you seen? What have you done? What's going on? And then, oh, let's talk about let's talk about our latest author we're talking about, latest director, I should say, we're talking about.
Absolutely. And today we're going to be talking about Christopher Nolan, one of the biggies, and we're kind of getting to the point where we're looking forward to the Odyssey coming out, his latest film, and he is one of these directors. I mean, it's interesting that we're getting Disclosure Day with Steven Spielberg and the Odyssey with Christopher Nolan the same year, because I think those are two directors who, in terms of big Hollywood entertainment, they're the sort of marquee names that Hollywood can produce, and there aren't that many left.
No, I mean, James Cameron seems to work on a slightly different sort of level in which it's so industrial and vast that you don't even think of Cameron as separate from his films, or as a sort of, which is unfair on Cameron a little bit, but we don't think of him in the same terms. We don't think of him as a director. I think we think of him as a kind of force.
As a factory.
Yeah, he's got a giant machine of sort of the future of filmmaking. And what interests me a little bit about Disclosure Day, you mentioned it, is I've noticed how there's been a real sort of doubling down on Spielberg as the selling point. The film obviously has been kept fairly under wraps, what it is all about. Obviously, it's kind of an alien invasion film of some sort, alien encounter film of some sort. But it's really been Spielberg is the star of the show. He's led the press. Normally, he's a little bit in his later years. He hasn't done masses of press. He doesn't feel he needs to. But there's been a real sense that Spielberg is the point. And I wonder whether that's a little bit to echo how Christopher Nolan has almost become a brand in himself. It's not to say that Spielberg isn't a brand, but of recent years, he's not really played that side of himself, Spielberg. He's gone off and done his personal films. And it really feels like they're trying to do a Nolan with Disclosure Day, in a sense, with Spielberg.
Yeah, there's always a sense with Spielberg, I feel, that he's often promoting like a property that's already got some exposure, such as Ready Player One was a hugely popular novel, War Horse was a hugely popular novel and then stage play, The BFG was a hugely popular story from Roald Dahl, West Side Story was already massive. So everything he did, Fabelmans was a move away from that because, of course, it was his autobiographical film. And a film I rewatched recently because I felt that I didn't like it when I saw it at the cinema, so I sort of rewatched it to give it another chance, and I still don't like it, I'm afraid. It's a bit on the nose.
It is. It's always, I think Ready Player One is another interesting example. Ready Player One to me was a film that shouldn't have been directed by Steven Spielberg, because the book was about Steven Spielberg to some extent. It's like a love song to Spielberg. Therefore, it needed an outside view, because it's a commentary on what Spielbergian means. And the last person to do that commentary is Steven Spielberg. In a sense, Fabelman's, in a different way, falls into that trap. It's like he's too close, he's because it's his story. There's lovely touches in it, but it's a little bit too Spielberg to tell the story of Spielberg, if that makes any sense at all. It's like you can't stand back from it. It's too skilled a filmmaker to make a dud. But I know what you mean. It's almost like Fabelman doesn't commit to what story it wants to tell. It doesn't quite find it. It's like it's about the mother and then the parents splitting up, or it's about the fact he was a young Jewish kid in a kind of all-American high school. It's about the birth of the filmmaking. It's about all of these things. It never seemed to settle on what its point was. And I came away a bit sort of undernourished by it.
Yeah, I know totally. Undernourished is a very good phrase. And I thought that when he goes and sees David Lynch as
Yeah,
John Ford, that is the film picks up enormously, and you
I
just
know.
thought, I want those non-Spielberg influences to be in the film.
There's a great story that he snuck used to sneak onto the set of Universal. It's not quite true, I don't think. There was a family connection at the studio, but he used to turn up with a briefcase as a teenager basically, and then he snuck onto Torn Curtain, the Hitchcock film, just to watch Hitchcock at work. You think, oh, these would have been fantastic things to show in the movie, the next stage, the young filmmaker. But maybe that's who we are, and that's what we want from it. But I don't know. Yeah, it was. I'm kind of glad he's gone back to sort of a bigger scale film and the early preoccupations of Aliens and Contact. But I haven't seen it yet, so I'm yet to judge it. But yeah, but it's funny, isn't it? We're talking about Christopher Nolan, and in a sense, Nolan has become a bigger force than Spielberg in modern culture. Yeah, it's
Well,
almost like
he doesn't
Spielberg.
have the adjective, does he? There's no Nolanian type.
No,
I mean, we can recognize a Nolan film when we see it, and there are certain preoccupations we see
yes,
repeated. But I mean, I think Spielberg is strange because he has this. He's the sun at the center of the sort of a certain Hollywood solar system, and anyone who gets too close to him, seems to get burned. You remember, like M. Night Shyamalan being
yeah.
called the next Spielberg, and then that it
Oh,
was
J.J. Abrams was then going to
exactly,
be all these
yeah.
kind of guys, and it's not a good thing to do or be sort of shouldered with. Um, and the more you look at Spielberg, I know Nolan's our subject, but the more you look at Spielberg, the more you realize he's unto himself. The more you realize
Mm.
he's unique. In fact, you look at, I did the book on him a few years ago, and you look at the early films, the one everyone treasures because they're the childhood, E.T., Close Encounters, Raiders, Jaws, they're kind of that suite of early films, and you think, oh, this is the blockbuster. But actually, they're very weird blockbusters. They're about people. They're about reality. The fantasy elements are kind of brought into the reality. He's never been good with world building in that kind of George Lucasy way. Films like Hook and to an extent Ready Player One suffer because that's not what he's brilliant at. What he's brilliant at is the real world and real people and how they encounter kind of great exaggerated ideas. And I think that makes Spielberg, very unusual. And I think we sort of qualify him as mainstream in a way that he's not.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's very weirdly subversive and disruptive. I mean, I wrote an article some years ago for a blog called Electric Sheep, and in which I think I headlined the article "Spielberg Home Wrecker," and it was about all the scenes you have in Spielberg movies in which a domestic space is just wrecked.
Yeah,
From
yeah.
E.T. to Close Encounters. Close Encounters, you have several homes wrecked, one by the father,
Yeah.
one by the aliens. 1941
Oh, yeah.
delights in
They
utter.
literally wreck a home, don't they?
Absolutely, with a big beach, shore gun that
Yeah.
they're misoperating. And even the Orca could be seen as a sort of domestic space that
Yeah.
is destroyed. And
Yeah,
so
it is.
there's delight taken in that. And even going back to the Fablemans, his sort of inciting incident in starting to make films is from a train crash that he
Yeah.
sees, and so it's all about enjoying destruction and enjoying. I mean, I think that's one of the problems with Schindler's List. Actually, I mean, not I think it's a fascinating film and a
Yeah.
wonderful, in many ways, a wonderful film, and in some senses, the height of his filmmaking career. But there is still a weird glee about sort of what coincides with the Nazis project,
Yeah.
which is sort of clearing the ghetto in
Yeah.
Warsaw.
Yeah. Yeah, the history Spielberg is interesting, because I think there's a sort of sense about him that he's very self-aware and rather insecure, about his place in, even now, he's still a bit like, am I good enough? Marty and Brian, all the other movie brats were artists, and I was the kind of brash kid who never went to film school and all those kind of things. And you still get that sense that he's trying to make up for that. And his history films, I fully agree. I think Schindler's List is just probably got his best filmmaking in. And some of his, what's the great irony of Schindler's List is some of his funniest filmmaking is in Schindler's List, in a kind of very, all the depiction of Schindler at work in the Nazi machine is wonderfully witty, and so it's got beautiful things in it. But yes, you get the sense of Spielberg trying to prove something to us all rather than naturally easing into it. But often that can be a good force. I think Munich's a terrific film because it goes against what we expect, and its construction of tension is just second to none. I always rail
Absolutely.
against this idea that he makes feel good films. Even E.T. Go back and watch E.T. It's traumatic. E.T. It's really traumatic. And oh, it's such a feel good. He made us all charmed all our youth. I'm like, you were watching different films to me.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Totally
Yeah,
agree. That's a complete,
yeah,
again, it's about the breakup of family. It's about,
yeah.
the temporariness of
And it's about the
relationships.
knowledge that they're going to have to part. We know at some point these two are going to be forced to part, and we carry that with us. So it's yeah, absolutely traumatic. And yeah, and Dee Wallace, I think, is one of the great unsung performances. The sequence
Mm,
where she's introduced to the sick creature, the sick ET, and pulls her children away. I mean, it's a story of a mother,
mm.
confronted with threat. And I thought, God, who goes by this is a cuddly film? I don't know.
Absolutely not. Yeah, you might be able to buy a toy or so. So sometimes
Yeah,
people get lost in the merchandising and they don't actually watch the film anymore. I mean, this is true. I think your point about the blockbuster is very good because
yeah,
Tom Schoen wrote a great book called Blockbusters, and he makes the point that there's actually, I mean, the films actually transition into blockbusters and we see them retrospectively as
yeah,
blockbusters, but the films are not made as blockbusters. That's just what
absolutely.
happens to them commercially after they're released. So Jaws is a 70s movie. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is purely of its time. It's
Yeah, yeah,
not it's not packaged as anything. And if you put the script of Close Encounters into a sort of a writer's room today, or through the usual sort of vetting, it breaks every rule.
yeah,
Who's the main character? Why are they why do they leave their family? What's the
yeah,
backstory? What's the psychological motivation for any of the things that people are doing? Who are all these nameless characters who we never get to
yeah.
know? And the ending is utterly, how does that work? How
I
how
know.
was the
And it's a
audience?
happy ending. How does that?
Yeah,
What's going on here?
yeah. Brilliant. Well, let's move on to
Yeah,
Nolan, who is
yeah,
our, he's another subject of your amazingly prolific pen. This is a reprint that's
yeah.
coming
So it's,
out.
it's an updated edition. So
Right.
you obviously, when you write the books, you only get so far in the career, and if the books do well, then we return at a certain point what's enough to sort of update the book with. So when I first wrote it, I sort of got about just before Oppenheimer was in production, but it hadn't
Hmm.
obviously been released or anything like that. So, in a sense, what this new edition has is a full Oppenheimer chapter and the Odyssey up to the point. Obviously, I haven't seen it, but it's obviously up as far as I could take it in terms of a little bit of speculation and a bit of an understanding why the Odyssey might be a true Nolan film and might be a total break with form, and that's kind of where I've taken it to. So, yeah, an updated edition.
I'm preparing the paperback of the Terrence Malick
Right.
biography, and so every time I'm giving a deadline, it's like, when is Way of the Wind coming out? When is Way of the Wind
Yeah.
coming out? So if it's Cannes, I can write about it. If it's Venice, I'll have 2 weeks to do a chapter and hand it in. But
I mean, people don't realize with publishing, with books, it's an aircraft carrier. You can't
mm,
you can't turn it very easily. And I have these constant sort of senses when I write this book. I say, can I push the deadline? Not because I'm being lazy, but because there's a new film coming and I've got to get as near to up to date as possible. But you're always going to be slightly behind, the pace of immediate filmmaking.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a real yeah. And then your book comes out a year later, and everybody goes, "Well, why didn't he write about the latest film that we've all seen, and it's been out for 6 months?" And yeah, but anyway, enough of our woes.
Yeah,
Christopher Nolan. Let's just talk a little bit about him generally, and then we've both
yeah,
chosen two films that we feel are to some degree maybe underrated or underappreciated, even though it's kind of hard to say that about Nolan because he's got a very ferociously loyal following. One thing that annoys me a little bit is this, and this is, I don't want to get all men's rights or anti-woke brigade or anything, but this idea of the film bros having, the Nolan and
Yeah.
PTA and Kubrick, and they're the film bros. I mean, it's that sort of inverted snobbery where you feel like you've been pushed into a camp because you do rate him as a filmmaker. But yeah, I'm despite his popularity, there is some reaction towards his filmmaking, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, there's always reaction to popularity, isn't there? And we live,
Yeah.
again, not wanting to fall down a black hole of, you know, outrage and being an old man, an old white middle class, middle-aged man.
Don't at
Um,
me.
but yes, outrage seems to be obviously the fuel of a lot of what happens in social media. So you have to take a degree of it with a degree of salt. But I think what's fascinating about Christopher Nolan is he almost breaks sort of the rules of what we expect. Is that Christopher Nolan is an intellectual. Um, he's hard to place in terms of kind of popular terms. He doesn't make feel-good films. He doesn't make romances. His genres dance about like electrons. You can pick any film and go, well, it's science fiction, but it's also period piece, or it's also kind of horror movie, and which is all the things which delight me. That things are ambiguous and far more interesting than things that are nailed on. Yes, he certainly worships at the altar of Kubrick, but then Kubrick was the great scientist. Kubrick was the great, genius of post-war filmmaking in terms of what the medium can possibly do. And I think Nolan is like that. I think he's one of these guys and girls, I'm not trying to gender. It's you look at the edge of filmmaking and go, what happens here? Yeah, how do we tell a story with this medium? It's not, I want to tell these stories and film is the thing that I'm doing it with. It's that what can I do with film? How do I tell stories with film? So in that sense, I think he's very like Kubrick in that he truly is an auteur of the movie medium. You could argue that other directors, their films could be novels, and they might work that way. I don't think anything Kubrick or Nolan have ever made could work as a novel because they are about, one of the essential subject, I think, for Nolan that ties all his films together is the concept of film itself. He is fascinated by time. He is fascinated by editing and how that plays with time. And a lot of his films, Memento being probably the classic of this, really is an exploration of what editing is in film terms. There's a great story that Nolan tells of when he was very young, and he did that kind of exchange thing with France, and he went to live with a family in France while their kid went to live, with his family in London, where they were at the time. And the father of this French family was a documentary filmmaker and had his editing set up in the kind of basement of this French house. And Nolan was allowed to watch him. And it was an old deck. It wasn't a sort of an Avid. It was an old, and he was actually running the film back and forth on the screen. Nolan would see the image moving forwards, and he would see it moving backwards, and he'd see him stop and fix and then move it a bit and move it back. And that's almost that's kind of like the formation point of Nolan as a director is there. Because you look at all his films, and to an extent, even like Oppenheimer, they play with that notion of time, which always leads me back to like how on earth, therefore, as a guy who is almost a physicist of cinema, has he become this incredible brand where the idea of Christopher Nolan is the thing you go to the cinema for. As long as he, well, I think even if he said, "Look, I'm making a romantic comedy," I think even a lot of people would turn up to see what on earth he would make of a romantic comedy. But he also has an intuitive understanding of what the perfect Christopher Nolan film is. So to go from Tenet to Oppenheimer, then to go, "Oh, I'm doing the Odyssey next," and everyone goes, "Of course he is. He's Christopher Nolan. That makes perfect sense." of course, in the Odyssey, and I bet you he's going to play with timelines and multiple narratives and all sorts of things because that's what he does. So it's an extraordinary sort of instinctual yet completely kind of controlled, you know, he wouldn't say brand, but sort of creation of a kind of a sensibility, if you want.
Yeah, it's a sort of emergent property, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
like you put all these activities together, and Nolan emerges from the interactions. Um, I'm also interested in the fact that from a point of view of filmmaking technology, that idea that you said of the edge.
yeah,
He's making films with IMAX, but he's
yeah,
also very demanding of his audience. He's also saying to his audience, "Look, this film's going to take place. It's a war film. You know the
yeah,
story, but it's going to take place in three different time periods, going at three different speeds, and then at some point they're going to meet,
yeah. We're
or
going to
the
realize what's going on.
exactly, or the audio of his films is everybody's gonna criticize, but it's like, haven't you been watching Robert Altman films for the last,
Yeah.
30 years? Why do I have to explain to you that you don't have to hear everything audibly, just in the same way you don't hear everything audibly in reality?
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely true. I think one of his chief preoccupations for a man who makes very precision made films is about the effect movie has on our senses. Yeah, which is something unique almost to cinema, is it can be a narrative, but also affects us orally and visually and in vibration terms almost at times, sort of physically. And that's a property that other art forms have in part. Music has it to an extent, and theatre, you might say, has this ability to do effects. But the book is purely an intellectual challenge. I know it can move us physically, but I think that's something that I think he's very centered on. We always think of his films rightly as kind of very clever, and then the narratives are very sort of entwined. And to this day, I'm not quite sure what's going on in Tenet, and hopefully, John, you're going to explain it to me shortly. But yeah, I'm sure I'm not alone in finding it impossible to quite pan out what the narrative is. But what happens is, I think Nolan would say, I don't care, and that's not important. What it is, it's the effect it's having on you. And if you think about Dunkirk, the effect he wants is panic and growing panic. Panic isn't, I think he understands human nature very well. Panic doesn't happen almost in the instant. It builds. It's a sense of dread. It increases. So you're aware of something, you're in a bad situation, but then it's how you manage the panic that wells up. And that's a very human thing. Of course, in Dunkirk, it's taken to its extreme. But what it is three different forms of panic done at three different pitches. And he sort of ties them together in a very clever way, in which the audience then takes it on. So I think that's extraordinary that he plays around with not necessarily the intellectual, but though there is that, it's literally about what's going on in our instincts and our impulses. And the Batman films conform to this a lot. The plots are really knotty and quite hard to pass. But actually, you come away and go, God, that was so gripping. That was so exciting. The Joker was just this force of nature. And you don't stop and go back and go, his plot, actually, what he was trying to achieve doesn't make any sense at all. Uh,
Yeah.
but the Nolan thing is to give you this kind of tide of sort of sensorial effect.
Yeah, I think the this one of the opening scenes in Inception, and this goes to what
Yeah,
we were saying earlier as well about Nolan films being stars of themselves. If you say the word Inception to anybody, they Christopher Nolan film. Nobody would say Leonardo DiCaprio film.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and Leonardo DiCaprio is the biggest movie star ever. Why are we not? Why don't we? Well, there you go. So there's a sort of point in proves that point. And the other thing is that the opening of that scene is him sort of lying on a beach and the water coming in, and it's
yeah,
so tactile for a film that's supposed to be about dreams. This is also a film
yeah,
about embodiment, about physically existing in space,
yeah,
um, and and that goes throughout his films, is the very interesting sort of use of inserts and things to really ground what could otherwise be sort of sterile
Yeah,
intellectual things into very physical moments. Um, One other thing
yeah,
I'll bring up before we go on to your first film is one overarching theme that
yeah,
I feel pops up in every. I don't know if it's a theme or it's a thin red line or whatever that runs through his films, is this a notion of deceit and lying. There's the notion of a moral lie that in the words of Jack Nicholson, you can't handle
yeah,
the truth. So there's always a good lie.
yeah,
Batman covers up certain sort of problems which the Gordon Act had in order to
yeah,
keep
yeah,
the people in jail. His own identity, of course, is an example of the good lie. Interstellar, the lie about this is to save the Earth when it isn't. It's been,
yeah.
it's just they're never going to be saved by this. It's just a way of carrying on with human beings. Um, the Prestige, of course, is full of lies,
Yes,
including
it's
Michael
about
Caine's.
deception, isn't it? It's about
Yeah, it's
setting up people.
precisely. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And so there's all these points where someone at some point will say, that thing I told you at the very beginning of the
yeah,
movie, that's not true. I told you that to make you feel better. Um,
yeah. Well, you think about Memento. Memento is probably the prime example of that, in that he
exactly.
literally can't remember as a lie to himself. He's committed this terrible crime. And his process is that the body has started lying to itself. The brain has stopped him thinking about it.
Yeah,
He's back
absolutely.
performing. So it comes back to filmmaking again, though, I think, because in a sense, filmmaking is the ultimate lie because it's all an illusion.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Nothing of what,
Motion pictures.
yeah, they're not even moving. Yeah. So it's a kind of classic sense of deception. Yeah, convincingly so that we all fall for it. And I think that's again an intellectual sort of chasing his own deceit that he said, well, as a filmmaker, am I just a liar? In a kind of glorious way, is that what I do? And then I think you come out of that and you say, well, I can lie for a good purpose, which is what you're adhering to. I can lie with these themes. But he never settles on, I've asked the question, name a hero in a Christopher Nolan film, a pure hero. And certainly Odysseus will not cover this because he is a deceiver and a liar,
But precisely, yes.
absolutely a player of minds. Um, I don't think there is one. They're all flawed, they're all deceivers, they're all troubled. Um, maybe in Dunkirk, that's about heroism, in its purest sense, and then it's certainly in terms of Tom Hardy character and the Mark Rylance character, they are men who are acting according to the kind of rules of heroism and the desperation of this situation. But the Fionn Whitehead character isn't caring about his fellow soldier. He is getting off that beach. It's about survival, and survival is a
Mm.
different thing to heroics. It's a different impulse, and it's a different driving force. So, absolutely, Nolan doesn't make comfortable films in that sense. They are driven by deceit, and
Yeah, Al Pacino in Insomnia, and
yeah,
is probably the one of the best examples of the completely compromised. As
yeah,
I mean, does he shoot Martin Donovan or not? It's
yeah. It's a
does he?
fog, isn't it? It's a mist of
Yeah,
understanding. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get on with
yeah.
our choices. So I'll allow you dealer's choice to go first. So we've chosen two films that we believe
Yes.
to be underrated. What is your first choice,
My
Ian?
first choice is The Prestige. I'll do them in chronological order.
Sure.
Um, and The Prestige is a film, I'll be honest, I had trouble with at first. I'm a bit of a logic fiend when it comes to films. Not that I need them, necessarily to all add up and all be kind of precise. And I kind of go with fantasy and I go with exaggeration. But if your fundamental switch in a film cheats an audience, I'm troubled by that.
Hmm.
I'm going to spoil The Prestige.
Yeah, well, we're going to spoil all of Christopher Nolan's
Yeah.
films.
So
Let's
if
just
you've
say
not
that for
seen
them.
it, this is probably point to tune out and maybe tune back in later on because this will ruin it. Obviously, the Prestige relies on it's about two magicians in Victorian era London who come up with their own versions of the transported man, this trick which allows the magician to appear in one place and almost simultaneously emerge from somewhere else, an impossible feat. And they are sort of driven into a kind of almost insane rivalry, Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman's characters, not necessarily about their own success. It's about how the other one does it. It's about jealousy, which is a lovely sort of human subject, envy. And it's not actually dealt with a lot in films, envy. And if we actually looked into ourselves, we would realize we're tremendously envious creatures. It comes back to the idea of survival. It's a bit of a survival instinct to go, what are they doing? Are they doing it better? Surely I can do it better than them. And that probably cuts to the heart of filmmakers more than anything else. So I like to think of The Prestige as about two rival filmmakers coming up with their own
Oh.
versions of the same plot, but doing it in different ways and being obsessed with how the other one is doing it. And these are kind of great qualities. What frustrated me originally was when the twists emerge, we find out finally how each does their trick. One is brilliant. One I think is a superb piece of misdirection that fools the audience, which is the Christian Bale story, in which you realize he's a twin, and it explains everything about that character and his narrative, and the kind of the obsession to live the life that they lead, these twins, for the sake of a trick. The perfect trick. It's a wonderful kind of idea. The Hugh Jackman answer troubled me because it's science fiction. The film moves out of its sort of realistic milieu into the realm of make believe. So
Ah, okay, okay. I thought
well,
you
I
were going
get
to say,
frustrated with that. You
right.
can't guess the Hugh Jackman answer. You can guess if you're brilliant, the Christian Bale one. You go, oh yes, I've worked, there must be two of them. He must be a twin. You can guess that. It's like a whodunit work out. But with the Jackman one, you can't. That this magical machine was created by Tesla and it repeats, he basically reincarnates the body or clones and his old version. I mean, it's quite dramatic, but it greatly troubled me for a long while about it's a terrifically well-made film, full of great ideas, almost sort of Nolan at its purest. It's about the mechanics of things, it's about, staging, it's about atmosphere, it's about these kind of intellectual artists who are deeply troubled, deceitful men. Um, and all the effect that it has on those around, the women in their lives and all the families, all the effect it has on them. And I was greatly troubled by the fact that I felt let down. So when I returned to it, and I did the Nolan Burr, and I returned to it, knowing the answers, I wasn't bothered. Now I wasn't carrying that kind of I've got to figure this out kind
Mm.
of mentality. And it seemed to, it's almost like I wished I'd known the twist before in a weird way. I almost wish it had been spoilt for me before I'd gone in originally, because then I wouldn't have been carrying this all with me. And I felt very liberated. And I thought, how what a wonderful film it is about obsession, about technology. And if you especially look at the kind of the Jackman side of it, and it's about obviously Tesla and the wonderful David Bowie kind of cameo, which I'm not sure I
One of
really.
his best, I think.
I
I would say
know,
one of
and
his
it's so
best.
enigmatic. There's a great theory going around that Andy Serkis is actually the Tesla character, really is Tesla,
Oh,
and that the Bowie character is a stooge, and that's actually what the deception. I don't know whether it's
another double,
confirmed.
another
Yeah,
twist.
another twist. That's never been confirmed or denied, I believe, by Nolan. So you can read it that way again. But then this idea of replicating humans, it almost one of the great films that Nolan sort of obsesses about himself is Blade Runner. He adores Blade Runner. It's a real kind of guiding, film for him, especially in the way we've been talking about the idea of sense and the world coming to life, but also those kind of moral rules about if we create fakes and if we replicate, and what does this mean for humanity? But also, I love The Prestige because it's about madness and that the artistic journey is a kind of form of madness.
And a
And
form of suicide as well, because he's
yeah,
essentially killing himself every time he does that trick. And that idea that it is a kind of, as you say, this sort of science fiction
yeah,
magic, but it's science fiction magic which comes with a cost.
yes,
And it's like he's invented AI,
yeah,
but he's stolen the very thing, with
yeah.
the ease with which he's done that, he's stolen the very reason that he's doing it in the
Yeah.
first place.
and that question of is it the same person? You know, is it a new person? And has he murdered his previous self, or committed suicide as his previous self? And there are those kind of confrontations he has with his own bodies, and then that there's something very weird going on, and it's one of the weirdest things in a Nolan film. And one of the few instances, I mean, we're going to get some stuff in the Odyssey, I'm sure, but in which the supernatural kind of takes place in a Nolan film. All the others, including Interstellar, are kind of founded on rational science. It's just how he takes it to extremes. But here, suddenly we're in the realm of this is the supernatural, and this is real magic. And what form does real magic, if you want to call it that, take? Well, it's kind of science. It's kind of, and I think he's looking into the idea of the edge of things again, the edge of filmmaking, the edge of science. It's Arthur C. Clarke or Asimov. One of them said, show a primitive society future technology, and they'll believe it's magic. What they'll see is magic at work. And I think Nolan's sort of playing on that sort of concept of actually, if you take science to its extremes and we no longer understand it, it will appear to magic to us.
Uh,
And
I love the scene with the theatre owner who they're showing the show to,
yeah,
and he immediately recognizes it. He immediately
yeah,
says, this isn't. I don't want to know how you're doing this because it's a lot. I think he said something like, "It's a long time since I've seen real magic."
yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
you,
he's freaked out by it. It's
yeah,
not like, but
there's
he
more to,
recognizes it
yeah.
instantly. Yeah.
Yeah. And there is one of those, and it's a lovely constructed narrative in the kind of whodunit sense, in that the clues are all there. They're all given to you. And obviously, if you go back and watch again, knowing the secrets, then absolutely it's brilliantly written. It's kind of actually the pieces are all put in front of you. Of course, it's misdirection. It's stage conjuring. It's all about look over here and not over here, and that's beautifully constructed. It's one of his best scripts, I think.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
based on a Christopher Priest
yeah,
novel, which, to tell you the truth, isn't as good as the film. It's a good novel.
yeah,
It's okay, but I think the script improves it dramatically. And I mean, I think maybe if I'd read the Christopher Priest novel first, I might have thought differently. But to my mind, the film was much more, just had more ideas, was more interesting. And one thing I think that was missing from the Christopher Priest novel is the Michael Caine, and this is where the lie comes in,
yeah,
of the man drowning and saying it was like going home. And then
yeah,
obviously Hugh Jackman has used that as oh well, then it won't be so bad if I kill myself. And also reenact the trauma of my first wife's death.
yes,
Um,
yeah. Cheerful stuff.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And then, at the end, Kane says to him, I was lying to you. It was agony.
Yeah,
Drowning is agony. And I just like, Jesus, you've already been punished.
yeah. And that concept of death is a frequent one. The again, I suppose most artists can talk about this. Death is the overriding thing in everything, but that is very present in Nolan's films. That
Mm.
they are confrontations with death. They are journeys into death. That Dunkirk has it. Yeah, Interstellar has it. The whole of humanity, or virtually the whole of humanity, will be wiped out. Inception, is he lost? It's an underworld he finally enters. It's a journey into hell. And there is that very kind of carefully moderated or modulated sense of the spiritual in Nolan's work, that beyond all
Mm.
his cleverness and his technology and his kind of really intertwined narratives, they are confrontations with the beyond and what that means for us.
Yeah, yes, yes, and also the relationship between death and time. I think
Yeah,
there's a real sense that death is not some sort of metaphysical seven
yeah,
seal, you know, um, grim reaper. It's happening every minute that you're alive because you're
yes,
marching inexorably towards
yeah,
inevitable death. So time going backwards or time going forwards, or the scale, in Interstellar, where they go on the planet where every hour is a year, is a
And you just the
perfect example of
impossible
that.
thought of the guy left in orbit and they returned to him. I've been here for like 25 years or whatever.
Yeah,
And your brain
yeah.
can't comprehend it. You're like, well, what have you been doing for 25 years? Yeah, why haven't you killed yourself? What has driven you to be on your own? It's too staggering to get your head around.
He's just given up. He's just
Yeah,
he's like, oh, I didn't think you'd ever come back, you know. So, but we only saw you a
yeah,
day ago. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. The Prestige is my favorite Nolan film in a filmography, which I have to say it's very difficult. It's a bit like Kubrick. It's a sort of
yeah,
any film you're watching becomes your favorite Nolan film. It has
yeah,
that,
yeah,
Coen brothers with a few exceptions is similar, and
yeah,
um, so I'm gonna look at a film that I believe to be a little bit underrated. Not so much because it's underrated. It was very successful at the time, and in fact spawned a trilogy, and that's Batman Begins. But I do feel that it's sort of been subsumed by The Dark Knight, which is the by far the more sort of celebrated, and Heath Ledger is in it. Dark Knight Rises, I think, is unfairly treated. It has some plot points that people had a real difficulty with at the time, which it makes Nolan a victim of his own success, I feel, because he's so established this realistic world that people are going, well, wait a minute, how did he manage to get rid of that bomb with X amount of minutes when,
yeah.
and you're thinking, yeah, but he dresses as a giant bat. That bit didn't bother you, that that idea was
Yeah.
okay, and now you're gonna,
Yeah, it's a comic book. You've got to go with some of that. It's going to be idiom, haven't you? It's exaggerated.
precisely, you're filming it. It's like, how are we going to dress the opera set?
Yeah,
He's dressing it as a realistic world, but they're still singing opera.
yeah,
Um, and in fact, I think Dark Knight Rises is very, if you look at it as an opera,
yeah, yeah,
it's a good lens to look through, especially those prison sequences. They're like something out of Verdi or,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hans Zimmer's
The
score.
climbing of the kind of the pit or whatever. I mean, again, talk about spiritual dimensions, climbing out the pit of despair.
Dante, isn't it?
Yeah,
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 absolutely. But Batman Begins, when I first saw it, I was very, I knew Nolan from The Prestige. I knew Insomnia. He was still at a point in his career where it could go either way. There's plenty of
yeah,
people who had
yeah,
made a couple of good films, and then, people like Bryan Singer had made Usual Suspects, and that we didn't know at the time, but that was his peak. He was never going to
yeah.
get for various reasons. He was never going to get anywhere after that. And no, I don't think Bohemian Rhapsody is a good film. And no, I'm not even sure he directed it. Um, um, but Batman Begins is really, sorry, he's on the cusp of something here rather than having an established
Yeah,
Hollywood career. And he does something incredibly daring with the property, which I don't think we see as daring anymore because it's so successful. But I think at the time was very daring, which is this: let's make it as a realistic thriller, except it just happens to be Batman.
yeah,
So you see Christian Bale in these amazingly produced montages of him go, training to become Batman,
yeah,
and under the tutelage of Liam Neeson, and this is all tied to various strands of the stories in the comic books. Um, but it's always done in a quite a realistic fashion, and to your point earlier, it's also very tactile. They're
yeah,
cold in the mountains, and there's
yeah, yeah,
snow drifting down. And it's also another point that is often a criticism of Nolan that is humorless. I find it a very witty film. There's a lot of jokes in the movie which stand up, and
yeah,
it has such an amazing pace. It has an amazing James Newton Howard, Hans Zimmer score that is just almost become that's where the cliche of that kind of score is
yeah.
invented. It's not a cliche because they're the first guys doing it, and it looks, and it just, I think it's like going back to Star Wars and watching, like, I don't know, Battle of the Planets or something
Yeah.
compared to Star Wars. The design is what lifts it. The design of the
It's
stormtroopers in
still
Millennium.
it's much more Blade Runner-y than the next two, isn't it? It's they're
Yeah.
built sets for Gotham rather than shot in Chicago. They did some exteriors, didn't they? But a lot of it was built at Cardington, so the monorail and all that. But it's almost like they destroy Gotham at the end. I love the idea that he's sort of going, right, I'm even getting rid of that. I'm dispensing physically with the old school idea of a comic book movie, the exaggerations, the kind of the science fiction-y element. And so I'm clearing the way for absolute sort of heat style realism in my next
Yeah.
film.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. You know,
yeah,
you've got him sort of getting his little, shaving his back blades on
yeah,
sharpening them up, and then spraying his suit with
yeah,
black paint from an aerosol can, and it's just very, do it yourself, DIY, and redoing the Bat Cave, and there's this satisfaction of his
yeah,
um of him becoming this familiar figure, but becoming this familiar figure in a real world context and what
yeah,
that would look like. A stellar sort of ensemble cast, with
yeah.
Morgan
But
Freeman
also
and
tremendously risky. From the studio's point of view, they had no idea what to do with Batman. They were
right.
tossing it around, and Burton had gone, and Joel Schumacher had led it, in a path no one liked, and they knew it was a great property, but they had no idea. This is a little bit still ahead of the MCU stuff. It's a little bit still ahead of this is going to be for the next 25 years the biggest money making sort of subgenre if you want. And I think Nolan wasn't the first choice, and there were others who came and went. There's all sorts of things. That Nolan wanted to do a Howard Hughes biopic, and in some
Mm.
sense, is doing a Howard Hughes biopic. In Batman Begins. It's about a reclusive kind of billionaire who gets up to strange things. It goes in a slightly different direction, but there are elements. Um, and it's interesting because this is also the point where he was allegedly offered Troy, and the whole idea of Homer sort of incepts, shall we say it, in his mind is sort of plugged into there. Um, but then, yeah, they came and he was offered Batman Begins. And I think he and Jonah Nolan was very pivotal in the Batman films as well. But I think what's staggering about it is, as you're saying, it's the reinvention or the invention of what this subgenre called comic book movies could do. And in some ways it got deviated into the MCU where it all became about wisecracks and sort of CGI and unintelligible kind of interconnected knowledge that you've got to have about how it all joins together. Nolan's a much better, more linear filmmaker than that. But it grasped this kind of idea of what is a comic book hero? What is a hero? And say, well, actually, fundamentally, he's a vigilante.
Mm.
What drives a vigilante? And in a kind of world of crime, is the only way to treat evil is with an equivalent, form of evil. It's again, you talk about the lie. Is he a hero or not? Which is constantly debated through and sort of thrown back at him. There's that idea, isn't it? It's escalation that if he puts on a mask, then the villains are going to put on a mask. And it's just going to grow and grow and grow, which is what happens. And the villains are constantly throwing his image back at him. Two-Face is sort of just a literal embodiment of Bruce Wayne and
Mm.
Batman, the light side and the dark side, and all those kind of things. I love that Nolan sort of took all those sort of comic book elements, yet fed it through the Nolan filter and said, well, it's still going to be this great crime movie.
Yeah, and it
One of
is,
the great crime movies.
and in that first one, I think he uses horror quite interestingly, like
Yes.
the first set piece where Batman kind of appears, and he where with the criminals, and the
Yeah.
Batman is sort of swooping in like the xenomorph in Alien,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the bit where Scarecrow sort of douses him with hallucinogens, and or douses Rachel with hallucinogens,
Yeah.
and you see Batman as this horrible, monstrous figure, and you kind of think, oh, is that actually is she actually seeing the truth? Is that
Yeah.
actually who Batman is? So and talking about the MCU, I think weirdly, Batman Begins, sorry, did
Yeah.
inspire things like Iron Man, the very first Iron
Yeah.
Man, and that approach to let's make him an arms dealer and put him in a very a real world
Yeah,
context. And then, as you say, it did, but it immediately, with once you had the Avengers themselves, it became
yeah,
sort of screwball comedy script
yeah,
plus as much sort of mayhem as or bayhem
yeah.
as we can afford. Where would you place the Batman trilogy in your sort of Nolan
It's
the
it's a,
filmography?
yeah, it's a weird thing to say if you look backwards on Nolan's films, is you forget about them.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. You forget
Yeah.
about them as a
Oh
bunch,
yeah,
and
he
you
made
forget
those
about
three.
Batman
Yeah,
Begins. Yeah.
he invented the superhero in the modern terms, the superhero film. See, yeah, I think I'm not a big an aficionado of The Dark Knight, as I know a lot of people hold it as one of these kind of great kind of modern blockbusters or reinvention of the modern blockbuster. And I mean, it's got so many good things in it, the truck flip and Heath Ledger's performance. But I think actually it's a little bit uneven. I can't follow that plot. I know it suffers from a central problem. I don't think Nolan solves is that your central character is the force of chaos. Your central villain. Yet here's the most intricate plot. It's like
Yes.
it would take a really controlled, measured thinker to come up with. And you're like, well, how do these things work together? But maybe I'm thinking too hard, which is a danger, you fall into. So I do like you. I like Batman Begins the best. I think, in a sense, all superhero films want to default to an origin story. It just
Mm,
fits the idiom best. It's like, how did they become this? And it just works nicely to get the kind of idea of you get the Freudian links, you get all the kind of things you can do, and it's about creating a character. And so Batman Begin works better as a story. I love the courage of not doing the Riddler, the Joker, or the Penguin, as his upfront villain, and going with Ra's al Ghul, who I'd never heard of. I'm not a big kind of DC kind of follower. So I was a little bit confounded by the twist at the end, or a little bit like, oh right, what? Yes, it's probably one of the weaker elements of Batman Begins is he doesn't quite pull off his twist.
yeah.
It's you're still processing it as the plot sort of gets on with itself. You're still like, what was it, Liam all along? What who, with Ken Watanabe, what's going on?
Yeah,
And
the sort of League of Shadows is not a good thing,
yeah,
or it is a good
hey,
thing, or
it's one of those occasions where sometimes Christopher Nolan is just a bit cleverer than me, and I can't quite sort of keep up with him. But I love its texture. I love it's the way it harkens to Blade Runner. I love that it sort of takes. What I love Batman Returns, the no the Burton film.
yeah.
That for me is the high watermark in comic book films because it's a fairy tale, and that's the right way to play this world. But I love that sort of Nolan found this kind of quasi science fiction way of doing it, and then he blows it all up and says, "No, I'm going another way." But I love that,
Mm,
and I like it when Nolan is a little bit closer to the more fantastical genres. That um, yeah, as you say, his films are all kind of horror movies, and they are kind of all science fiction, and they are. And I love it when he pushes that a little bit closer. It's why I'm very excited about the Odyssey because it pushes him closer to the things that he sort of stands back from, but obviously he's very much part of.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting what you say about story because it's something I've suspected for a long time. Is that the source material of comic books are like weekly stories, which might
Yeah,
even be very long. Might be cut into
yeah,
installments. But then you have like a movie, and I think a movie has to say this is a story. It has to have this
yeah,
singular, standalone. Yeah, that's what I always thought. I thought it was a really bad idea to start chopping films up into part ones and part twos, as
yeah,
as
yeah.
the Harry Potters did and the Hobbit did and things like that. Um, that integrity of story is so fundamental to watching a movie that you end up watching TV at the cinema if you're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a beauty in it as well that the idea of film was it's a storytelling medium. It's here it is, but it has these kind of very interesting restrictions. And again, it comes back to time. How much time can you cram into 2 hours? Can you cram 100 years into 2 hours? Can you cram a whole life into 2 hours? And that's the great challenge for the filmmaker is to to do that, to create an illusion, to create the trick that constricts time or expands time. And I think that's again essentially what Nolan does. He's fascinated by that challenge. That
That's a perfect
yeah,
segue into your next
yeah,
film as well.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we sort of talked about it quite a lot already. I think Nolan's finest film is Dunkirk. Um, I think it's the purest, if you want, expression of what Nolan wants to achieve with film. It's it takes something obvious, the historical epic, the historical drama, in which a piece of World War II history is replayed for us with all the bells and whistles a modern filmmaker can bring to it. We all want to stand up and applaud. But Nolan doesn't do that. What he does is take the concept Dunkirk and he says, everybody knows what Dunkirk is. We all know it. Even if you're a kid, at school you've studied it, and the word Dunkirk tells you everything you need to know about history. What I'm going to show you is a live action. It is if you are in the moment of Dunkirk. So we don't get, the scenes at HQ, people pushing boats on maps, with kind of all those wonderful sort of black and white wartime scenes of, Roger 47, basically about exposition sequences. He dispenses with exposition entirely in Dunkirk and says, this is a disaster movie. It's a lovely switcheroo he does. You think you're watching a war film. No, you're not. You're watching a disaster film. This is what it is.
Yes, yes,
So I love that kind of deception, which he's so brilliant at. And then, the immediacy of how he makes it. And he's such a physical filmmaker. He barely uses CGI in his films. I've talked about him a lot as the kind of cutting edge and a forward thinker. But he's such a traditionalist as well that he rails against CGI and cheating is what the immediacy of it all is what he thinks counts, and I fully agree with that. If you're going to make a film about Dunkirk, you shoot it on the beaches of Dunkirk, and that's literally what he did. And the weather was hell for them. It was probably the hardest film he's ever made in physical terms. But then he said we understood as a crew what it was like, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to create the idea of panic as a force and put it into the audience's beings, not just their heads. He wants to put it into their kind of selves. There's this extraordinarily Nolan idea in the film about music. And Kubrick famously said, all great art aspires to be music. That's the ultimate form of any art is music, 'cause it's almost abstract. You can't exactly explain why it's good or
it's
bad.
extra lingual. It's
Yeah,
it gets away from
yeah,
language and
yeah.
appeals to our bodies.
And that's very much present in Kubrick's films, in which you can see him pushing towards the 2001, of course, being a great example. It's a dance, it's a musical, it's a concerto rather than it's a full symphony, really. And I think Nolan in Dunkirk is really pushing toward that idea. And there's a thing called the shepherd tone, which is okay, it's a little bit music and it's a bit physics. It's sort of three tones at a certain level. I'm probably a musicologist out there will be able to correct me on this, but if you entwine them, it becomes one single rising note. It sort of becomes something different. And the three notes together create one note, and the note is sort of discordantly rises and creates agitation. And it's been used in classical music for just that effect. And Zimmer and Nolan conceived of this as part of the musical accompaniment of Dunkirk. This would be going on. And it becomes the narrative. It's the three tones are entwined to become one rising tone of panic. Now, of course, Nolan doesn't want us to be thinking about this when we go in to see the film. Oh, I see. Tone one is the beach. Tone two is the plane. Tone three is the boat. And, we're going to go back and forth and they're all going to work together and it will all make sense to us. But that is what happens beautifully, to my mind. And of course, then there's lovely thematic elements. There's earth and sea and air, and there's lots of fire. There's all the elements are sort of coming in. So in a kind of Greek way, it's working is again that spiritual dimension. Plus, he's doing the brilliantly simple thing of what is it like to be Tommy, Fionn Whitehead's character. He's known as Tommy, but we never know whether it's his actual name or not, on the beach, trying to get off the beach. It's the simplest idea in the world. All he wants to do is get off that beach, because that beach is death.
Yeah,
And
by trickery, by
yeah, yeah,
any
and
means necessary.
it's almost like a Buster Keaton film at times. It's all about physical movement, but it's not comedy. And then you have the idea of the plane with Tom Hardy and what it's like to be in a Spitfire, and the immediacy of that, and that sense of all you're doing is buying the other's time. It's all about sort of creating
Mm,
time. And then you have the Mark Rylance and that element of heroism of what does it take to get it. We all take it for granted, don't we? Oh, they rescued them off the beach because they crossed the channel in all these fishing boats and everything. But we never stop to think how hard it is to cross the channel in a small fishing boat in bad weather against the clock. And
yeah.
again, Nolan puts you in those sort of three elements. I think the weakest element of Dunkirk to me is Kenneth Branagh. And
Mm.
the one thing I don't like in it is when he sort of looks and he sees all the boats turn up on the horizon and the music soars and he does a little teary eye. And I thought, no, 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 you've not done this, Nolan. You've not done the patriotism. You don't need that. We're with it. But apart from that, and he does this shepherd note. He brings them all together, and you realize they all work at different time signatures. One's 3 hours, one's a day, one's 10 minutes, or whatever it is in the plane. And he
Yeah.
crosses them, and it's so ingenious. But the ingenuity is almost beside the point. It's the effect, and that comes in the Spitfire landing at the end, the boys on the train being handed the beer, all these. Finally you can exhale at the end, and to me, it's just the most complete demonstration of his talents.
I'm absolutely there with you. I mean, again, I'm not, I don't know if I could say it's my favorite because I've already said prestigious, but but it certainly got that. It certainly moves me incredibly watching that
Yeah,
film, and I love the details of Tom Hardy writing the
yeah,
time on a little notepad on his dashboard, and that speaks to what you were saying about, what's it actually like to fly a Spitfire? What's it
yeah,
actually like to get the landing gear to come down? It's all incredibly mechanical. It's not electronic. It's pre-electronic
yeah,
aviation, and one of the things that talking about sort of the classical aspect of Nolan as a filmmaker is this is a film that comes out after Saving Private Ryan and a whole
yeah.
host of Second World War movies, and there's not a single bloodstain in the film. You
Not a single
know,
German.
the,
You don't see a German in the film.
Exactly, and
Brilliant.
yet
Yeah,
when you see those bullets
yeah,
hitting as he's running down the street and they hit the wood of the fence he's climbing over, it's absolutely you feel the impact of the
yeah,
bullets, or you feel the impact of the bullets going into the boat. And yet, at the same time, you feel the bombs dropping as they
yeah,
do in the distance, and it gradually comes towards you. But all of that, as you say, sort of dread and embodied fear, panic, is evoked without resorting to grotesque imagery of
yeah,
gore or bloodshed or whatever. I mean, and yet I watched the whole of the movie, and it took me until, say, the second or third viewing before I noticed that. It wasn't
yeah,
like I was thinking, that's an interesting decision. It just didn't occur to me because
yeah,
the
yeah,
film is a violent film. It just
yeah,
isn't a violent film by ordinary contexts. The one I'll give my sort of caveat as well,
yeah,
my criticism. I agree with you. Branagh says too many sort of trailer-friendly
yeah,
lines.
yeah,
What are
yeah,
you looking at, sir? Home,
yeah, yeah.
that sort of stuff. It's like, oh, bugger off, Branagh. I mean, he's not my favorite actor and definitely not my favorite director. Anyway, one of my also bits I didn't like is the scene in which the kid Mark Rylance takes along
Barry
is
Keoghan's character.
yeah,
Yeah,
he dies accidentally as a result of Killian Murphy's. Is it Killian
yeah.
or Cillian? Cillian
I
Murphy.
say Killian, but again,
Oh, okay, Killian Murphy.
I'm not
Yeah,
100% sure.
we'll yeah, don't apologies already in advance.
Yeah,
Um, I found that too much of it's almost like he had to have the good lie so that Mark Rylance coming back says we'll tell everyone he died,
yes,
heroically rather than any other reason. And that's sort of like you don't really neither the death nor was really necessary in that to prove that point. It felt a little bit too I don't know, too manipulated to put in
Yeah, I
there,
know what you
you know.
mean. I know what you mean. Did he need another subplot, another thing that would
Yeah,
evoke the same ideas that have been evoked beautifully elsewhere? That
exactly.
the
Yeah.
cost to young men, the idea of accidental death, the idea of the whole kind of world
And
in chaos.
I mean, in a sense, I remember reading a figure somewhere that more soldiers died in traffic accidents than by bullets in the Second World War. And,
Right.
you sort of, in a sense, yeah, maybe it is worth showing that just moving that number of people backwards and
Yeah.
forwards across Europe and across, you know, is much more, the number of bombers lost just through engine failure
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than bullets is, it's absolutely, massive percentage. But yeah, it's such a good film, and it's such a film that is worthy to be considered amongst his best. Um, the final film that we're going to talk about today is probably one of his probably his most disliked, I think, or his least appreciated. Although,
Yeah. It's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I think I mean, it has a little bit of a problem in terms that it came out during COVID. It caused a split between uh, Nolan and his studio of the time, which was Warner Brothers, and it weirdly led to Barbenheimer, because the reason Barbie was programmed for the same day as Oppenheimer's release was because Warner Brothers president then was wanted to get his revenge on Nolan for jumping ship, and he thought, oh, I'm going to put Barbie on the same
Yeah.
day as and I'm going to blow you out of the water, as a sort of dick
Yeah.
competition. And sort of like more fool he, because I think Oppenheimer's figures
Yeah.
absolutely benefited from going head to
Oh,
head
you
with
couldn't ask for better
Barbie.
publicity, could you?
Absolutely, and he won all the Oscars. So
Yeah.
there was no doubt about. Well, there was a lot of doubt at the time, but he definitely
Yeah.
came out on top there. Um, Tenet is a. I mean, I think there's always been the idea that he would make a great James Bond director.
Yeah.
And this is Inception has elements of James Bond when they're in the snow. There's a real sense. Tom Hardy has a sort of Bond feel to him in that film. In Mombasa, and there's a globe trotting element to that film. Tenet is the same sort of globe trotting, the same sort of secret agent with Robert Pattinson and John David Washington
Yeah. John David
yeah,
Washington. Yeah.
is the protagonist, the
Yeah.
rather archly labeled protagonist. Um, the whole the action scenes are just phenomenal in this film. I just think they're
Yeah.
really well done, and like the action sequences in Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, there's a real sense of, oh, these are things I've never seen before. These are real moments that feel they're in camera and they feel remarkable. The whole
Yeah.
sequence in Tallinn, the opening scene was also shot in Tallinn. I've been to that
Yeah.
opera house where they shot that thing, which is totally derelict, would you believe?
Yeah.
Like post-Soviet sort of community center and opera house. And I just loved and then you've got this idea of the backwards fighting and the and that brings you into sort of cinema history with sort of Jean Cocteau and the Beauty and the Beast and Blood of the Poet and things like that, of just how remarkably odd
Yeah.
winding a film backwards is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Again, to your idea of the French exchange and the editor in the house, sort of,
Yeah.
just how magical and weird the reversal of entropy is, and the reversal of the laws of thermodynamics is. Eggs don't smash. Eggs
Yeah.
don't tend to all go together after they've been smashed, or glasses unspill. But in this film, you have car chases where the sort of the crashed car
Yeah.
leaps back onto the road, and it's just phenomenal, and yet it's so at the same time so simple. And I think John David Washington is amazing in this film. I think
Yes.
he's a really solid, he really probably one of his best performances in an already impressive career. And I love Richard Patterson as well as what he seems to be a favoured actor, one of those favoured actors of Nolan. He's in Odyssey as well.
Yeah, and he knows how to use him well, doesn't he? Because yeah,
Mm,
there's that great charm and the good looks and that kind of movie starness, the Errol Flynn-ness of him,
mm.
and Nolan knows how to sort of orientate that and not make it silly. He gives it a kind of great charisma, and he's very important to Tenet, I think, because he gives it a charm. It's quite a Le Carre film in many ways. A lot of the spy stuff is very cold. And I think Panton brings that kind of public school charm that Le Carre has. He sort of waltzes in and goes, "Let's liven this whole thing. Let's have a cocktail. Let's have a gin and tonic now, and
Yeah, let's not take it too seriously.
yeah, let's
Yes.
laugh it." And you think, "Oh, thank God, I can just have a bit of a smile on my face as I watch this."
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I think that Le Carre comparison is very good. I think there's a sort of the super rich idea of, we're going to have a boat race on this vehicle that nobody prior to the film knew existed. It's just like, it seems to be invented for the film, even though it isn't. But yeah, and as for the story, I haven't got a clue. I don't understand it. And I just don't really care. I get the feeling it's slightly compromised by the fact it feels like the first of a series. I'd be very interested to know if he'd sort of written storylines for sort of a
yeah,
second or
yeah.
third, because it really has a sense of like, we'll see you in the next, where because I mean the antagonist of the film, other than Kenneth Branagh, seems to be invisible. This
It's a
is
really interesting
meant to.
concept, isn't it? It's not only reverse time; he reverses narrative rules.
Mm,
So the plot is actually happening in the future. The exposition is all going on after the film has happened and sort of being sent back down the line. When I wrote the book, I'm going to try and understand this plot. So I went online, I watched all these kind of YouTube tutorials about understanding Tenet, and just got more and more confused. But as far as I understand it, there's sort of two futures. There's a sort of blasted, evil, dystopian future in which everything's radiated, and then some post future in which they try and fix the immediate future, and all these kind of weird organizations that we never meet and never understand. They are Nolan, they are just Nolan sort of pulling the strings and on the outside. And it doesn't matter, as you say. The problem I have with Tenet is that I can't quiet that part of my brain that's trying to understand it. I can't. I'm going to go right. Okay, that's there, and Robert Pattinson might be the son of Elizabeth, Debicki's character in the future, and I try and put all the pieces together, and I've failed to do it. I failed to come up with the ultimate solution. But I think,
Aaron Taylor Johnson turns up as
oh
a,
yeah, and
you
I had
know,
the whole army sort of battle sequence at the end, in which literally there were the blue team and the red team, and I'm still right going, hold on, there you come from. And yeah, he's so brilliant, Nolan, in the sense that, yeah, you trust that he's got it all sorted in his head. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I love that Emma Thomas, his wife and producer, yeah, and she's always the first to read the scripts, of course. And she sits down with a glass of red wine. I think she said she needed a second red wine after this one. She's really like, what? What? Chris, are you all right? But it's the ultimate echo of what we were talking about. It's the ultimate demonstration of this is a film about filmmaking. This is a film about what filmmaking is, and taken to some strange extremes. I can reverse the film and I can play it forwards, and I have the ultimate mastery over
I'm
the
I'm
world
going
I've
to
created.
play a fight scene twice.
Yeah,
I'm going to play almost every action scene twice, but seen from two different angles and seen from two different time, beginning to end and end to beginning. I mean, it's going back to Memento. It's going back to
yeah.
his very origins. I mean, I would say I totally agree with you. And the brilliant Martin Donovan, who's like doing the exposition dumps and saying, Tenet, it's a word and aside. That really that comes back again, but it's really unnecessary. It could have just been a word. This could have been an
Yeah,
email, you know. But but yeah, I there's I think that filmmaking analogy is very good and very well, but it's also interesting in the context of his career that he obviously felt this was a misstep. He obviously felt that he lost his audience. Um, and then with Oppenheimer, he comes back with a film which, again, is incredibly demanding to
yeah,
the audience. It's hugely demanding in terms of how the story is told. I think there's a lot of Terrence Malick in the way it's edited. I think it's edited very similarly to sort of the Tree of Life, where there are very few actual scenes. It jumps
yeah, yeah,
time frames quite a lot. A lot of the scenes are shots, you know,
yeah,
um, and uh, and yet and again to the point we were talking about as well in terms of death, that final shot of the missiles launching
yeah,
of sort of, you know, this is not a triumphalist story of human
yeah.
ingenuity winning the Second World War. That gets passed out, that gets heartily criticized by the film, and then you see these, you know, potentially this apocalypse happening. It's you know, do you think we could blow up the world? I think we already have, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Is you know, that to me is peak Nolan. That to me, I walked away from that film thinking, I've seen a masterpiece, and I've seen a masterpiece which really speaks to the now in a way that Nolan maybe hasn't done before. It felt like a step up to me.
Yeah, yeah, very much. And I think he was conscious of, have I made a serious film? Have I
Right, right.
made a film about,
Going back to Spielberg.
yeah. And I'm sure if you have given facility to make pretty much anything you want, within certain sort of Hollywood parameters, and you were then surely troubled by this idea of who you are and what you want, and it's true of Spielberg. I think he felt I'm seen as a childish filmmaker. Yeah, I think it's unfair, but he was seen as a sort of the Peter Pan figure. And with Nolan, he's seen as sort of the great clockwork master, who can create these marvelous sort of contraptions that we all kind of adore and want to pull apart and figure out. But I think he wanted to make a more human film, but still a Nolan film, and in a sense, what could be more Nolan, as you're saying, than Oppenheimer? I love the bravura of the middle sequence of the film, of the creation of the bomb. And it's like it's a movie production, basically, isn't it? They all go and on location and they all have to work together, and it's a struggle and full of backbiting and all those kind of things. And the director's got to marshal it all. And to this one extraordinary, the great bomb sequence and the great Trinity testing sequence. So it has all those kind of self-referential elements. I did struggle a little bit with the time sort of jumps, only in the sense I wonder whether, did he have to impose them? Was he by his own instincts? I can't just do a straight linear narrative. I've got to do something clever, and it sort of works, but you've got to sort of understand. It's one of those great Nolan things that enlightenment comes late in the film, and the enlightenment of the meaning of the Robert Downey Jr. stuff and the meaning of how America had turned on him. It comes very late. So you spend a lot of the film, as you're saying, sort of assembling it in your head, going, okay, we're back in black and white again, and we're back with, and Downey Jr. seems to be the protagonist now and not Oppenheimer. And yeah, he's juggling a lot, but you can't fault the ambition of that he's not going to play it straight. But I was less interested. I was sort of, even on the second viewing, I was so stirred by the history making that the kind of political points. It's almost like I love the scene with Gary Oldman, as Truman, and as he walks away, going, "He's a crybaby,"
Yeah, yeah.
so much about told you so much about Oppenheimer's state of mind that I thought a lot of the Downey Jr. stuff didn't need to do. I thought, right, got it. He's collapsed mentally and he's become a laughing stock. You know, And
Yeah, yeah, and
yeah,
and there. I mean, it's so obviously sort of taken out of his hands and all the rest of it.
yeah,
I mean, I think there's a real sort of asymmetry with the idea that you can't, I can't really worry too much about the injustice done to Oppenheimer when
yeah,
Oppenheimer's own work seems to be. But I feel that on the first viewing, that did make me uncomfortable. Like there's meant to be this triumph that justice has been done.
yeah,
And then it hasn't been, and then it's been undone. By the second hearing.
yeah,
But at the end, I just thought, no, actually, the film is playing with a lot of that and is making you constantly question him in a way which is very healthy. Final points
yeah,
then.
yes.
The Odyssey. What are
Yeah.
we expecting? What do we want? What did you think of the trailer?
Um, obviously kept close tabs with all of it because I've been writing about it. I was very excited when he announced it. I laughed because not at it, but I laughed. I trust him to come up with something bigger than we can expect. Oh, he's going to do this, going to do that. Oh no, he's going to do the
It's
Odyssey.
going to be the
And
Bible
do it,
next.
in the original form according to Nolan. Um, I thought the first trailer was terrific and sort of showed me his seriousness. It showed me. I liked that it was Matt Damon. I know there's been criticism of this, but I like the fact that he was sort of almost doing the Charlton Heston with it. He was doing the old Hollywood. I'm thinking about a movie star in the middle of it and populated with all the big names, just because this is the idiom I'm working with. This is the formula, but I'm going to Nolanize it. I'm going to sort of up the ante. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the second trailer people have sort of criticized a bit. Yeah, it doesn't bother me that it's not historically true because the story isn't historically true. It's myth, and whether the armor is right for this era, I couldn't give a monkeys. If it looks spectacular and brilliant, great. This is not historical realism, and nor do I want it to be historical realism. Um, but yeah, there was a sort of sense of the second trailer wasn't as spectacular as we had hoped. Was he holding something back? Uh,
I
yeah,
was I was wondering about that actually because I
yeah,
thought the script of I know you can't really judge a
yeah,
script by a trailer, but there's a bit where sort of Matt Damon turns to his men and goes, "Let's go," and they start running towards, and it's just like, wow, what an orator!
yeah. Is that a trailer maker's deception, or is that
Yeah, I
very
was wondering.
broad kind of use of drama by? I don't know. What I'm intrigued about is how he has done myth and how he has
Mm,
played with the gods. I was a little bit off, but when he sort of did an interview with Time, I think it was, and when I'm not really doing the gods, I'm not doing the Olympus thing like from Clash of the Titans, where it's a load of old British actors in togas and but from what I understand, Zendaya is a goddess. Is she Athena? I think. I
I
don't get. I'm sort of deciphering the tea leaves a little bit here, or probably the sheep entrails, I should say. I'm deciphering. Um, yeah,
the thighs of the cattle that you're
yeah.
burning.
So
I'm
yeah,
I'm actually rereading the Odyssey at the moment as a sort of in preparation. Also, partly as an excuse because it's always good fun to read. I'm reading Emily Watson's
right.
translation, which has been greatly praised and indeed is very, very good. And I'm really interested in how all those Nolan things we've been talking about are in
Yeah,
there. All the
yeah.
time in
Well,
multiple
yeah, different.
narratives.
Yeah, different.
Telemachus is here and
Yeah,
Odysseus is here. There's loads of flashbacks. There's loads of, well, how come you've taken this long? The references back to Troy, there's a lot more Troy in it than I
yeah,
remembered. That people keep going, oh yeah, when I was back in Troy, this happened, and
yeah,
Agamemnon is killed when he gets home, and Helen is married to somebody else and is in the
yeah.
Odyssey, and you're sort of and yeah, I don't see how you can do it without the gods because so much of the
Yes,
poem is the gods are absolutely written into the story. They're not, characters are sort of doubled by
yeah,
the gods in order to sort of move the action along. So yeah, I mean, I see it as from the trailers, I see it as him doing almost like a Lord of the Rings version of Homer.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure he's probably adhered to the original. You don't call it a book, don't you? The prose poem, the oral tradition of what Homer's story is. I'm sure he will make us understand that this isn't Tolkien and this is, a more ancient thing, and we'll play with that. I mean, it's lovely. Once you start, you go, he's doing the Odyssey, and as soon as you realize he's doing the Odyssey, you think, well, in fact, he's made the Odyssey, every time. The Dunkirk's an Odyssey, and all these things, and you start to kind of, the concept of gods becomes interesting because, like Tenet, all the manipulators are unseen forces, and they're kind of like gods, and it's kind of like, well, how Homer portrays gods, certainly, as the
Well,
ultimate. Yeah.
Inception is it feels like that. What's the one that where he goes into the underworld and has to play music to lead his love out of the
Well,
underworld?
yes, Inception, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, no, that's what I
yeah.
mean. But
Yeah.
there's a classical story.
Oh
Uh,
God, it's not Orpheus, is it?
Yeah, Orpheus,
Yeah, yeah,
Orpheus in the underworld. Yeah, exactly.
yes,
And he turns around at the last minute and loses his love. I mean, that I see Inception as taking place entirely in a dream. I don't think there's
yeah,
any of that
yeah,
film that
absolutely,
is taking
yeah.
place in reality. It's just all
But
a
then
dream within a dream within a dream.
get sort of too knotted up in highfalutin things. Every film is a dream, in a sense. It's a dream.
Eyes wide shut.
Yeah, yeah, all films are sort of projections of the imagination of the filmmaker and his team, and they're sort of dreams. And I mean, you can spiral into kind of Nolan-like madness if you go down those roads. But certainly, you hope the Odyssey will play with those ideas and play with the idea of getting home. It's such a Dunkirk thing, isn't it? His battle is just to get home, and all the kind of things arrayed against him, temptation and deception and know thyself kind of elements to it that will make a very strong sort of character to pull us along. Plus you hope for, it's got a one-eyed, giant they're going to fight, and those kind of night things in the woods. Yeah, I'm kind of excited on a sort of technical level. And beaches, no one does beaches like Nolan.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Hopefully there'll be a bit of snow in there because he likes a snowscape every now and again. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The journey home, the prestige, the insomnia. They're in
Yeah,
Alaska. There is a memento. He's in hotel rooms and he's
yeah,
never going to get home to his wife because she's dead. And there is this longing. I wonder if some of it comes from the fact that Nolan is this sort of mid-Atlantic
yeah,
kid who had this international experience, but it also means you're never quite sure where your home is because
yeah, for sure.
it's gone. Well, listen, Ian, that's wow. I think we gave Nolan an
We gave
epic podcast.
a good hearing for Nolan. I'm sure,
Yeah.
a million other things you could say, but that's the joy of these filmmakers, isn't it? That it's an unending discussion, really.
Absolutely. We'll have to get together. I'm sure you're going to have a new book coming out any moment
We
now.
got some
So
plans. There's a Sofia Coppola one coming in the autumn, so we can
brilliant.
gather and talk about a very different kind of mood and vibe, and that's always a pleasure to talk about her work. So,
Absolutely. Oh, well, I look forward to that. And then maybe even as a sort of, prologue to that podcast, we can see how much our predictions and our anticipations, expectations of the
yes,
Odyssey played out. Thank you so much, Ian.
cheers.
And just to say to the listeners, please remember to subscribe, like, spread the word about Writers on Film. It's really appreciated. And everybody tells me I should say this at the end of the episode, so I am doing so. Until next time, bye-bye.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.